Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phil Sharon. I'd welcome you all to this webinar put on by Think Company, featuring John Young with his talk about demystifying website performance. Just a little bit about Think Company. We're an experienced design and technology consulting firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Although, especially in today's day and age, I think every company is probably based everywhere right now. We're all working from our homes. And this is a talk that John has done in the past for some of our client seminars and out in public speaking engagements that he's done. And this is an effort on our part to sort of give back to the community. We've always spoken publicly, and because everyone's quarantined at home, we thought we would start offering some of the webinar stuff that we do to people out there in the general public, regardless of where you are. We do have a couple of other talks that are coming up soon that we thought we'd go over. The first is next week on April 7th. Mac, we know him as Mac, doing a talk that he did at our client seminar, our client event earlier or late in 2019 called Process Debt on Software Projects. It's a modification of that. It's also a talk that he's done out in public a few times. If you're interested, please follow our, we'll have links. I think we'll have links at the end of this. We'll also be putting them in the chat field, and you can, sign up for those as well. So that's next week. Additionally, myself and Abby DePrimo are going to be doing a talk that we do every year for Philly Chi. Abby's going to be one panelist. We're going to have panelists from other organizations in the city, people from large organizations and people from agency type organizations like ours. And this is really to help UX practitioners who are transitioning from maybe one organization to another or looking to advance their careers, talk to a group of hiring managers around what they're really looking for when they're looking for a new UX practitioner in their organization. And these can change from the different type of organizations. So that's why we're looking for large enterprise size organizations and small design agency. So without any further ado, outside of those two webinars, just to talk a little bit about the ground rules. Like right now you are in Zoom's webinar platform, so everyone's muted by default. At about 3:45 today Eastern time, we will start the live Q&A. That's scheduled to last for about 15 minutes, although the last webinar we did, it went as long as 4:30. So John and I are able to stay until 4:30. We'll stay as long as you need us. If you have other questions that you want, we'd love to help out and answer questions. Post your questions within the Q&A feature. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen down there. If you, I'll be monitoring the Q&A channel, and we'll choose questions for the Q&A session at the end. If I select your question and you're still in the room, I'll unmute you and ask you to ask the question yourself, because John would love to have a conversation with you rather than this should be me reading your question. However, if you want to be anonymous, that's fine as well. If you post it as an anonymous question, which you're allowed to do, then I will ask the question on your behalf. So don't feel like your anonymous questions will be ignored. Depending on time, we may not get to all of the questions. We got to all the questions the last webinar, but just in case, we may not get to all of them. And we do have moderators from Think Company in chat and Q&A, so they may actually be helping to answer some of the questions that you have while we're going through John's talk. So some of your questions may be answered before John even sees them. So those are some of the ground rules. If anything else comes up, we'll definitely be engaging with you in chat. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce John Young. John's been writing code and leading teams of developers since 1999. He's led projects for Comcast, Merck, other pharmaceutical, media, and financial service industry clients. John firmly believes that the best predictor of success in a project is how well those teams communicate and whether they have the right tools and information to do their jobs. John's very passionate for knitting high-performing developers into capable, competent, cheerful teams that deliver amazing results. And he's actually a very fun and engaging speaker. So I'm going to hand it all over to John now, and I'm going to mute my mic and start monitoring the channel. So take it away, John.
Great, thank you, Phil. I am going to share a portion of my screen. And so if I have done this correctly, I think the participants are now seeing a slide that says, "How fast is fast? Demystifying web page performance." Excellent, great. I want to preface this. every participant, every attendee here knows more about some fraction of this than I do. This is a deep, complex topic with many areas of expertise, and any individual area, you will know more than me about some chunk of it, perhaps most of it, maybe all of it. My goal here is not to school you on lots of things you don't know. It is to give you a tool to use to communicate web page performance with the rest of your teams. The backend developers, you will be very used to targeting particular metrics, and you're very good at moving those metrics, measuring those metrics, talking about those metrics, but maybe your front-end developers aren't quite on the same page about it. And your stakeholders probably aren't even on the same book when it comes to this stuff. Stakeholders, you've been in the grooming meetings where the front-end developers and the back-end developers, it sounds like they're really getting into the weeds. They're like, we're gonna start using fragment caching. Fragment caching, it's too soon to start using fragment caching. No, it's never too soon. We're gonna give you some tools to like figure out and have conversations so that everyone can arrive at the same goals and talk about things in the same way. Because kind of the whole point is for everyone to be able to agree on what the goals are and agree on whether or not those goals are currently being satisfied. So what we're talking about is web page performance. We are talking about how to measure it. And that's real easy. All you got to do is get out a stopwatch and stop it when the page is done. So that was easy. 8 minutes in, when we're pretty much done with this webinar, because all you got to do is start it when it loads and finish it when it, well, I don't know. Actually, it's a little bit tougher because a web page, I mean, there's a lot of stuff on it. So I guess we start it when the page is blank, and then we finish it when 100% of these things loaded. Well, I don't know, because some of those things are invisible, like, and there's GTM on the page, and GTM just tends to spin and spin and spin. So the page feels loaded before everything comes through. So, okay, cool. New approach. We're going to start the clock when the page loads, and we are all going to become experts on the navigation timing API from the Mozilla Developer Network. And all of us are going to learn what each one of these 14 things are. And we are going to pick one of these things, and then we're going to use that one thing. And everyone's going to completely agree that time to interactive is actually the crap. You know, now that I think about it, I don't think the stakeholders are really going to be willing to learn all of this and stuff. I mean, like, we could pick one thing, but it's kind of like, all right, fine. We're going to do what every vendor does, and we're going to pick one thing, and we're going to measure the time from the request for the browser and to the end of the browser. Cool. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use time to interactive, and we're going to start when the request is made, and we're going to finish when the page reports that it is interactive, even though that's kind of an invisible event. And now that I come to think of it, because some pages load pretty quickly, like this page, you know, I made the request, and suddenly, you know, like right away, almost all of the page loaded here. And then, you know, after a couple of seconds, this little dealie on the second item here came in, and then the umbrella loaded, and then everything finally came in. But, you know, really this page felt like it was loaded pretty quick. Whereas this page, same amount of content after the same duration, but it just doesn't feel like it's loading as fast. So I guess the goal is to figure out how we're going to measure what the user feels like the page load is, how the user perceives the page load, and put one simple number against what that page is. And that is what I'm going to talk to you about today. It is called the speed index. And the speed index is a perceptual approach to measuring page speed. The whole point of having a, using a perceptual approach is to make it a metric that is meaningful to the user. It's not a measure of how fast your Akamai cache is performing. It's not a measure of whether or not your React approach of doing just-in-time rendering or ahead-of-time rendering is working properly. It's not a measure of any individual decision that has been made. It's a measure of how all of them come up and result in the viewport being displayed to the user. And here's, and now we'll get into it. I would love it if somebody would just put something into the chat right now to let me know that the chat is up and working, and that if anybody has any questions, you can stick them in there. Great. Okay, cool. We're good so far. As I go forward, we've got like 3 people whose only job here is to sort of groom what's happening in the chat window. So if you have questions, even if you think I might be handling it, don't be shy, go ahead and put them in there. All right, let's get into how the speed index is calculated. Then I will talk about how you can actually use it with your team. So the speed index takes an approach of actually taking a video of the web page loading. And it's kind of figurative, but it's actually kind of literal. I mean, literally, you can ask Headless Chrome to take a literal video of the web page loading, and then you break that down over the course. So here is a video of the web page loading where items come in quickly on page load, and then a couple of things straggle in after that. Boom, the page is mostly loaded. Now the page is fully loaded. Request, pow, page is mostly loaded. Last couple of things come in. Then we take that video and we turn it into a film strip. And that film strip shows that in the first, right away, most of the things loaded, and then some other things straggle in. And then we compare the histogram of each of these things to figure at each point, what is the difference between the page at this point and when it is finally loaded. At this point, the page is 0% loaded. At this point, the page is, frankly, I would say 95% loaded compared to its final state. 96%, 97%, 100% loaded. Let's look at that on a different page. We're going to take a video of this page. Same page, a little bit of a different loading pattern. This page starts off, gives you a little drip of something. Oh, the header came in, and gradually the other stuff come in. Now, this is not a night and day difference. However, the first page is quote unquote faster than the page we're looking at here, because the first page, you got more of it than you do with this one. Breaking this one down into a film strip, you can see that the page, the request is made, you get, I don't know, 15% of the page, you get 20% of the page, you get 22% of the page, you get 100% of the page. Let's graph those things out. The first page, if this y-axis is percent complete, visually complete, and this x-axis is time, the first page is mostly loaded pretty quickly and then stays mostly loaded until it finishes. The second page gives you a little bit, stays a little bit loaded for a longer period of time, and then the rest of the stuff comes in and it's finished loaded. These 2 pages on this graph, in this artificial example I've made up, have the same total duration, but the first page gives you more faster, and the second page gives you less slower until it catches up with the first page. So let's calculate that out mathematically, or at least using a graph. These 2 pages, the one that comes in quickly and the one that comes in slowly, let's look at the first one, the one that comes in quickly. In this page, we have nothing, then we have most of the page, we have most of it until it completes. The area under the graph is how much page we have. Now, let's say this page has GTM on it, or it has one other asset that isn't visual, and so it straggles along, and this page stays in this state for 20 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever. We would not measure the area under the graph, we measure the area over the graph. In other words, we count how much of the page hasn't loaded yet, and then we add up how much of the page hasn't loaded over the course of the page load. In this case, the case of the first page that gives us most of the stuff right away, we have a speed index of 1.2 seconds. We're using seconds because for no particular reason, just because it's the unit that goes along with all the other units here. All these things, if you take this area over the graph and add it up, there's 1.2 seconds. In other words, the user has spent 1.2 seconds worth of time waiting for stuff to load, and that's kind of low because they got most of their stuff pretty early. Let's compare that to the other page. On this page, we got a little bit of page, but it took a long time for the rest of it to load. The loading graph looked like this. We got a little bit early, and then we had to wait. And when you add up all that waiting time, you end up with a speed index of 9 seconds because there's a lot of area over the graph here. There's a lot of time spent waiting for stuff to come on into the page. So the thing that I spammed on LinkedIn, the actual formula that's been using here is percent visual complete the area over the graph, sum it up from the beginning of the page load to the end of the page load, and that is your speed index. So one more time quickly, the first page, we got more of it right away, and so we graphed it up, and then we waited a while for the last little bit to come in. There wasn't a whole lot of space above the graph, so that gets a low speed index of 1.2 seconds. The second one, we only got a little bit of page. We had to spend a lot of time waiting for the rest of the page to come in, so the speed index is 9 seconds. Lower is better on the speed index. So in other words, 1.2, that's plenty fast. That's great. If you have a speed index of something like 1.2, you are done. Hooray, that's fantastic. If you have a speed index of 9 seconds, you've got a lot of work to do. But the good news is that you already have experts on your team, or you are that expert and you already have opinions about what you need to do. If your speed index is 9.0 seconds, you already know what your issue is. WordPress is just calculating too slowly and I need to cache the whole page, or our fragment caching strategy is whatever. You'll know that there's something going on. Now, I'm going to dive in and I'm going to show you some examples, because the important thing isn't really how this is calculated. The important thing is to sort of like get an eye for the speed index so that then you can start using it in conversations with your team. If you have any questions right now, before we skip on to the next thing, I encourage you to stick them into the chat. Yeah, John, but what about? And then we'll return to those as I'm going through here. All right, so let's look at some videos of some pages loading. Here is our very own thinkcompany.com page load. And the 0.0 is because the request hasn't been made yet. I'm going to load the page. This is the duration, and this is going to lose saturation when the page is complete. So this page took 4.6 seconds to load. The speed index of this page is not 4.6. 4.6 is just the amount of time that it took for the whole page to load. The speed index of this page is 1.5. which is pretty fast. 1.5 is not the exact moment at which the page felt kind of loaded to the user. 1.5 is his synthetic metric used to figure out how much time does the user has to spend waiting for things to go in. Now, you'll notice that the speed index is only calculated for stuff that's inside the viewport, because this is a perceptual measure. It's measuring what the page load time looks like to the user, not whether there's 3 miles worth of web page down below it. So 4.6 seconds to completely load this page. But the thing I'm here to talk to you about, the speed index, this page has a speed index of 1.5. Next up, here's another site that Think put together, the UXD Leadership Summit. This is going to load fully in 2.3 seconds. This page has a speed index of 1.8, also pretty fast. I'm using desktop here. Normally we would measure on a mobile device, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So this is a speed index of 1.8. Let's look at GoPuff. GoPuff is loading. Oh yeah, nice and fast. Speed index of 1.8. So far I'm showing you examples of pages that look quick, that are loading quickly. These speed indexes that begin with a 1, plenty fast, I would consider. Airbnb, a speed index of 1.2. Now, this page actually took 3.4 seconds to load. So if you were using a metric that was purely just based on time to interactive, it might be in fact, it would be 3.4 seconds. But the speed index of 1.2 means that this page is ready to go very quickly and the page feels fast. The point of the speed index is to give you a repeatable metric that you can use to talk about what the site feels like to the user. Here's a Vanguard page with a speed index of 2.4. 3.6 seconds to load. The speed index is 2.4. All right, let's look at the Reddit homepage. This has a speed index of 5.8. 5.8 is pretty slow. And let's have a look at how that loads. It took about 1.8 seconds until something happened. And then it's going to take a long time for the rest of the page to populate. Did you see all the time we were spending waiting things to come in on the page? 11.2 page load overall. The speed index is 5.8. again, the speed index doesn't measure a particular moment at which something happens. It's the cumulative amount of time spending twiddling your thumbs waiting for stuff to load on the page. The nice thing about the speed index is it's very easy to measure, and I'll measure that for you in just a moment. Corporate.comcast.com. This is Comcast's corporate page. On the day that I measured this, it had a speed index of 3.1. This is a really good example because you spent a while waiting for the cookie banner to load, which can throw things off a little bit, but you get a lot of the page right away. VT info, the VIP, speed index of 3.3 seconds. Let's do a couple more. Walmart with a speed index of 4.3 seconds. See how you're waiting for all the stuff to come in. This particular page is waiting a long time for the JavaScript to finish and for the carousel to go. So that's a 4.3. Let's look at Wawa with a speed index of 4.4 because we're waiting for all those carousel cards to load. And Google. Anyone have any guesses what the speed index is going to be for Google? Stick them in the chat. Speed index of Google, 0.7. Bam. That is the gold standard for speed index. All right. So if I were you, I'd be getting a little bit bored looking at all the other sites and their speed index, and you'd like to start measuring it on your own. So here's who can measure the speed index right now in another tab sitting at your desk. Open up a new tab. If you are in Chrome, and if you're not in Chrome, open up Chrome. And take the right-click on whatever web page that you are interested in measuring. Oh, Ryan did guess 0.6. Nice job, Ryan. Right-click on the page that you would like to measure. It's going to be your corporate homepage or whatever it is, and select Inspect to open up Chrome DevTools. Once you've opened up Chrome DevTools, the speed index is located in the Audits tab of Chrome DevTools. So open up Chrome DevTools, click Audits, and by the way, if you're having trouble with this or you're new to using DevTools, just go into the chat, ask a question. There's like 3 people in there that will pop you with a link on instructions on how to do. Open up DevTools, go to Audits, check a performance audit. The tools built into Lighthouse, that built into Chrome for measuring things, are fantastic, and there's a lot of wonderful things that you can do in there. The one that we're talking about is audit that's built into Chrome. So just check performance and uncheck everything else to speed things up. Device, you can either choose mobile or desktop. I like to choose mobile these days because mobile first. Most of your users are probably on mobile, and that's what you want. And then select no throttling. It is very useful to use applied throttling when you're measuring mobile devices, but that's a different result. What it really does is it exacerbates any slowness you have. So for right now, just click no throttling, click clear storage, click run audits. It should take 5, 10, 12 seconds to run an audit, during which time Chrome DevTools will scare you with all the reasons why slow page load times are terrible. And then in the result that you get, you will see the great big Google calculated number, which is synthesized from absolutely everything, but that's not the number we're talking about today. The number we're talking about today is the speed index, and the speed index will be expressed as a number of seconds, 0.3. So this was a speed index audit of the Google homepage. And on this particular example, the speed index was even faster than 0.7. This time I got a 0.3 second result for that. I want to pause right here before I get into discussing discussing how you can use the speed index and suggestions, and just give people a chance to stick any questions that they might have into the chat, or have other questions that you might want to talk about. Because what I'm about to do next is I'm about to get into what's a good speed index, and then we'll talk about how you can talk about it. So, is this specific to all Chrome? The speed index is not specific to Chrome. Chrome uses an NPM module called SpeedLine to measure the speed index. It is one implementation of the speed index measurement. So that segues beautifully, actually. You can measure also any page using the centralized tests at webpagetest.org. Webpagetest.org is a grassroots page. It came into existence at AOL, and it was open sourced in 2008. It's a grassroots site. There's a number of companies that will donate hardware to actually run the tests, and then they get their sponsor logo on there. You can go there right now to webpagetest.org, and you can run a speed index test just by putting in a URL. And you can also get a video out of your page loading, which in fact is how I got the examples that I saw just a moment, that you saw just a moment ago of all the other pages. You can download a video of your test. What's more, you can even run a side-by-side test of your page and your competitors and put those videos side by side to see which one loads faster. And if you were looking to rattle your stakeholders' cage to really show the importance of getting faster, that is one fantastic way to do it, is going to web page test. So to answer the question, is it specific to Chrome? Lighthouse is a very fast, very easy way to measure, and I like it because probably everyone on your team has access to Chrome DevTools, so you don't have to wait for the one QA expert on your team to do the results. Your stakeholder can drop in and measure the speed index for themselves, and if you are the stakeholder, you can run the speed index for yourself, and you can use that as acceptance criteria. Now, what's a good speed index? In 2013, 7 years ago, WebPageTest ran a test of the top 300,000 sites from the HTTP archive. And at that time, the median was 3.5 seconds. At that time, the speed index was expressed in milliseconds, not in seconds, which is why I'm dividing by 1,000. The average time was 4.4. So in 2013, the average website speed index out of the top 300,000 was 4.5 seconds. 7 years later, that is very pokey. I would say that a speed index anywhere in the 3-second range is adequate. Anything in the 2-second range is pretty good. Anything in the 1-second range is, yeah, great, you're there. And anything sub 1 second is something that you can really brag about to other folks. Of course, that depends on your audience. It depends on your user's expectation, most of all. But it's very easy to do because you can test your competitors' websites just by right-clicking, inspecting, auditing, doing a performance test, and then comparing the speed index of your site and their site just to get a good idea. So it's very, very easy to get. Now, so, okay. So far, I think I've been very clear that I like using the speed index because it is a proxy for a user's perceptions. I like using the speed index because it's easy to measure. It is not the case that you have to have a special performance expert running all the tests when they get around to it, which means you get the results every 3 weeks. Everyone can run it. You can run it right now. In fact, I hope you're running the speed index test on a page in another tab so that we can talk about it or we can follow up on it. Speed indexes are perfect for acceptance criteria. If you are not already including a speed index in your acceptance criteria, this is a fairly non-controversial way to do it. Imagine trying to write time to first byte into your acceptance criteria. Imagine trying to write, you know, a number of other synthetic metrics into your acceptance criteria. If you're looking for a simple acceptance criteria that is essentially the integration test of all the other performance tests, unit tests, this is a great one. You can just write in your feature, hey, the speed index of this page should be 2.2 seconds or lower, as measured in production, if you like. And then when you're doing your demo, you can just crack open the Lighthouse tools and find out whether that acceptance criteria has been met or has failed. And everybody on your team can do it. You can do it in the 10 minutes before your stakeholder demo. You can just double check that you're getting that acceptance criteria. You can write it into your performance budget. None of the pages in our application may have a speed index greater than 3 seconds. One sentence, throw it over the transom. Now everyone is like, great, we've got something that we can agree on how to get there. How to get there, of course, your front-end people, your middleware people, your back-end people will all have good ideas about how to contribute to getting there. But this is a great metric that you can use as a requirement to say, like, look, if the speed index of this page is greater than 3 seconds, we need to change something. Who has some good ideas about what to change? You can write it into goals. If your speed index is 7 right now, obviously you're probably not going to say we're going to get to 2 seconds in the next release, but you can write it as a goal into every iteration. Every release, we would like to decrease the speed index by 0.25. When you do that, there will probably be some people will have some great ideas about a quick win. Well, if we just do this, we can get it down by 3 seconds in the first iteration, and then we'll spend the next couple of iterations gnawing away at it until we get to where it's fast. So you can use the speed index as a target either in the short term or in the long term and just say, hey, we're going to gnaw away at it by a quarter of a second every day. The speed line tool that calculates the speed index has a command line version. So you can put it into, you can teach your Slack bot to do it. If you like chat ops, you can have your Slack bot every morning calculate the speed index of your page. And every day at 9 a.m., it'll come in and chirpily say, hey, good morning. Page speed index this morning is 1.2 seconds. That's the same as yesterday and 0.2 seconds faster than this time last week. You could certainly do that with time to interactive. You could do that with any other of the metrics that are out there. But because the speed index is such a good proxy for user perception of how your page is loading, it's a really good, simple thing to do to put as the stuff that's above it. And of course, you can put it as an acceptance criteria in your pull requests because it's command lineable. Those of you that run acceptance tests or use GitHub Actions say, like, great, we're going to put a new assertion in there that I'm going to run the speed line in an automated way. And if the speed index is over 2.4, then the pull request is just going to get blocked. Now, you would have to have a pretty nailed down continuous deployment chain for this to make a lot of sense. But hey, it's entirely possible and it's fairly easy to set up, so you could certainly do it that way. The value of the speed index is really in the fact that it's easy to talk about. You can write it as a one-liner in, look, we're going to use speed index as our KPI, and then you can link slap someone and say, what do you mean the speed index? It'd be like, run a Lighthouse tool, there it is right there. And say, oh, okay. And then they can say, oh, well, right now I ran it and I got a 7. And we're like, and we're going to work on that. So it's a standard way of talking about page performance that, in my opinion, is a really good way that is not encumbered by vendor tools. Doesn't require you to learn a whole lot of science, and it's portable across desktop and mobile. Any of these tools, it's just as simple as running a mobile viewport and calculating what your results are there. So I'm going to pause right there, and I'm going to ask if we have any questions. There's 2 so far that I saw that are answered. So I will pause there. Phil, will you please open it up to questions if anybody has any?
Absolutely, I'm happy to open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions about this, please post them in the Q&A tool. Actually in the chat room as well.
Great.
I think John, while we're waiting for that, like I kind of had it when you mentioned doing this mobile first, I started to wonder, how is this impacted by, data rates, connection speeds, things like that? Especially if you're using it to set goals in your team around, just do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, your network connection will absolutely affect your speed index. And that is why when people are being fastidious about it or they're trying to do it in a repeatable way, you'll say throttle to 4G speeds or throttle to 3G speeds. So that way, when you're artificially limiting the network speed, you can do that for repeatability. What will happen is that you will get incredibly long speed index times, like 17 seconds, which can be depressing, but you got to know that that's because you're doing it as though the person were browsing from the worst part of their train commute.
Right.
Where they're right by Overbrook on the R5. And it's like, but you know, it's worth knowing because if you're trying to load a page right by Overbrook on the R5, it really will take 17 seconds for you to get there.
Great. Well, we have a question from Marnie. Marnie, I'm going to test this out. I'm going to give you the ability to talk if you want to. If you don't want to ask the question, then I'll just read it out loud to John. But here we go.
Hey, John, can you hear me?
Hey, Marnie. Yes, I can. Hello.
Awesome. Hello. So my question is, how good are the simulations for mobile in the browser? Because I know, like, when I've tested other things, when you plug in a device, it's actually quite another story sometimes. So is there a disconnect there?
The answer is they're pretty good. You know, they're certainly better than they were from the times when you had a stopwatch and we were literally taking videos of you literally clicking a stopwatch at the beginning and the end of the page. You know, the rendering engine in Chrome, the behavior using Lighthouse is not terribly dissimilar from the rendering engine on a Motorola phone. And so I would say that they're within shouting distance. So it's probably a fairly decent proxy. However, if you know that you have a very processor intensive single page application with a lot of animation on it, in that case, that's when I would start reaching for tools like, you know, using Browser Stack on a mobile device or using a real device. I would use Speed Index as sort of like the benchmark, the stake in the ground, and then test that against a real device just to see if what you have going on makes a big difference. But just in summary, it should be, my opinion is, my experience is, it's pretty much the same.
Cool. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
So Neha hasn't actually typed her question, but she raised her hand and I confirmed that she has a question. So Neha's next.
Hey, John.
Hello.
So my question, and I'm a designer, so forgive me if the question has some falsehoods in it and I just don't know it. Is there any difference in what is considered a good speed index or bad speed index based on like the type of site that you're loading? So for example, I don't know, let's say you're a videographer and you're loading a ton of video content, or some giant reporting platform and there's a ton of like dynamic data viz loading. I don't know if that, you know, affects things or not.
I'll give you my knee-jerk personal reaction to that. Like, people will say, oh, it depends on what people's expectations are. I think some people are just used to crappier load times than other people are. So like, some audiences will be more tolerant. Like, they won't burn you as hard as other audiences. But a speed index of more than 4 is like starting to get abusive, in my opinion. You know, because people will often say, well, it's an intranet site. The fact that it's a speed index of 11 is okay. And like, okay, like, where are they going to go? But, you know, it's still, my opinion is that you're shooting for 2s and 3s. You're happy about 1s. And if you're below a 1, you know, you get to put it on a t-shirt and wear it out and brag about it.
Great, thank you.
All right, so Jason typed a question. He's in the room 4 times. So I don't know which one to actually unmute. So I'm going to take a crapshoot at it here. See if that works. Jason, I think you're unmuted. That may be the wrong one. Let me try one more. Let me try this one. Oh, actually, I'm going to unmute all of them, and eventually Jason will get a thing. Yep. Well, it's not working. I'm just going to ask Jason's question on my own then. Jason asks, on some of my sites, I see a very high speed index score, but the actual appearance of content in various browsers is quick. Is there any reason for this discrepancy?
You might have what's called a jank, where your content is rendering here and then it's moving down here. In which case the regular speed index might not be calculating that properly. In which case you want the perceptual speed index, which takes a jank into account. The slightly longer answer is, yeah, it's a good question. I would love to go over that with you. You can go to web page test and make a video and share that. Or you can sign up for the virtual coffee thing. Phil's going to provide a link. and I'd be happy to look at it with you and form some opinions. Speed index can be gamed, and it can also be confused. For instance, pages with a non-white background tend to get a slightly better score than pages with a white background, but not really that much. There's, barring some edge cases, it's probably pretty useful. So I'd be happy to take a look at it and see what the deal is.
Awesome. I'm looking for more questions. I don't see any more questions coming up. I don't see anything in the chat window.
Great. So let me briefly recap what we were talking about. There are many ways to measure page speed, and there's many ways to talk about how fast a page is. And even though I believe teams should agree on what fast means, it is surprisingly really tough to get people to agree on it because everyone will have their pet metric, and especially subject matter experts with deep expertise about one piece of the stack will have a particular metric that is very useful for their piece of the stack and very powerful for their piece of the stack, and often requires some subject matter expertise to really understand what that means. The role of the speed index is like an integration test that sits above those other things and measures what the user sees. And so for that reason, it's very good. Also, it's not a vendor metric. I've used vendor metrics before and they can be very good, but they're also often very synthetic, which means that you have to be all in on using that vendor's metric. And what's more, your stakeholders, your business owners, your product owners probably don't have a whole lot of patience for learning synthetic metrics. This speed index is a synthetic metric, but it's a synthetic metric that is a good proxy for what the user actually sees. It can be calculated by everyone on your team, and I want to restate the powerfulness of that. It does not require you to ask your dedicated QA person to write a test and then report it, because once that happens, you're only going to get that number once in a while, and it's going to be very hard to get. It's going to come at a slow cadence, and it's going to cause a lot of drama and agita when it arrives, and there's going to be a lot of argument about what it means. When everyone can calculate the speed index just by sitting down and running it, you can have productive discussions. You can have productive discussions in the product demo where you can start having some, you decide whether the acceptance criteria is useful or not. As a one single number, it's very useful because it's like 0 to 60 in a car. There's a lot of ways of measuring a car's performance. 0 to 60 is a good, easy way to talk about it. So it's easy to write into your requirements, and then you can use that to unlock what you're going to do. So setting KPIs, setting goals, setting targets, the speed index is great for that. I would be happy to talk further with any of you that are in here about what your speed index is, what it means, whether you think represents any broken windows or anything about that. And so Phil, I think you're going to talk a little bit more about the next steps and what that stuff is. Phil, you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Let me get my screen share going here. Oh my goodness. Totally unprepared.
Meanwhile,
why is this so hard?
Meanwhile, Phil, I see that you're saying in the chat that you're going to send a follow-up email. Oh, and there's the links. Great.
Yeah, so we wanted to thank everyone for attending. I did post all of this in chat, and there will be a follow-up email coming soon with links to everything John referenced in the webinar, any kind of tools that he was talking about, with a link to the recording so that you can watch it and share with your friends. There's also a feedback form that we'll be sending out. We'd love to get your feedback on it. It only takes about 2 minutes to fill out the survey. John was offering coffee with John. So if you would like to spend some time with him and ask some questions specific about your speed test, results from sites that you manage or are working on, John would love to go through that with you. He mentioned that a few minutes ago. So there's a post link there for that. And if you enjoyed this session, just keep in mind that Brian McElhaney will be doing a process debt on software projects talk next week. And also keep an eye on all of our social media channels. We'll be continuing to post more webinars that we'll be releasing coming up soon. Actually, I think there's a something in chat. Oh, Marty thanked you in chat. And I do have a raised hand, so I'm wondering, let me see if I can get over to that and go back to video maybe and see if we can jump over to the raised hands. Give me 1 second to get out of this. Go back into Zoom and see whose hands are raised in chat. Whose hands are raised in general? Oh, John, you are muted.
Yep. I think the Ryan was saying he raised his hand by mistake. Too late, Ryan. You gotta go
Okay,
now.
all right.
Yep.
All the hands are back down again. So, all right, great. Well, thank you, everyone. And look forward to getting any of those messages that we sent. And thanks a lot for attending. I hope you're all safe and healthy and your loved ones are as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening.
Bye all.